On today's episode of Some Assembly Required, I'm Assembly Minority Leader Gordon Hintz, back to host this week's episode. With Labor Day having been celebrated across the country, we'll take some time to reflect on the evolution of Wisconsin's labor movement. And later, State Representative Sondy Pope joins us to discuss the state of education in Wisconsin and other legislative projects she's working on. This is Some Assembly Required, a podcast hosted by the Wisconsin Assembly Democratic Caucus discussing what's happening in the state capitol and all things Wisconsin. I'm your host, Assembly Democratic Leader Gordon Hintz, representing the 54th Assembly District and the city of Oshkosh. On the first Monday of September, millions of Americans around the country observe Labor Day. We owe the ability to organize, receive fair treatment, and work in safe conditions due to strong labor unions that have provided a strong path for working middle-class people here in the state and around the country. Organizing workers was a response to both the concentration of wealth and the exploitation of workers regarding wages and working conditions. And Wisconsin was at the forefront of early union organizing as early as 1865, when the Milwaukee Bricklayers formed the nation's first modern trade union. In 1911, the state legislature passed the first workmen's compensation law, in addition to giving collective bargaining rights to employees. Then in 1932, our first unemployment compensation laws were enacted. And Wisconsin continued to support labor with the Wisconsin Employment Relations Act of 1937, which gave workers the legal right to organize. Of course, I'd be remiss in discussing Wisconsin's labor history without mentioning the transition in more modern times to Act 10. While Wisconsin was once a shining example of democracy at work with support, strong history in the labor movement, that was all largely undone with the election of Scott Walker in 2010. When Governor Walker was elected, despite saying he would sit down with public employees to bargain, he sprung upon the state legislative bill that would largely eliminate collective bargaining for all public employees while increasing health care costs and pension costs for public workers, with the exception of police and firefighters. The bill was introduced with no notice. It was not something that was talked about on the campaign, and obviously was, dropped with an ad campaign by the Americans for Prosperity, with something that could really only be deemed as a political act, not one that was justified in sound public policy. It obviously brought a lot of contention, with thousands of people traveling from all over the state to come in Madison in opposition, from public school teachers, from state employees in corrections and other places that recognized what was being done was undermining our working class, treating our public employees as something less than. It's been a divisive issue in the state of Wisconsin ever since then, and has had dramatic ramifications as we look at things 8 years later. The process was rammed through quickly, and again, the lack of accountability from a governor who ran for office on something totally different was met with a recall attempt that, while it failed, was driven largely by the governor lying to the public when he ran for office. Among the hardest hit as a result of Act 10, and one of the biggest negative impacts on the state of Wisconsin from Act 10, has been on the state's public school teachers and our public schools. For districts like the Oshkosh School District that I represent, the introduction of Act 10 led to an exodus of teachers, either through retirement or to leaving through other districts, making some district initiatives more difficult to sustain by having the kind of continuity that districts and schools need to build upon that. We've increasingly seen the respect for the profession erode as more and more people left and fewer students are becoming teachers today, a challenge that the state has going forward as we have a labor shortage. It's been recently been highlighted that Act 10 is one of the large reasons why we have a shortage of teachers in rural areas especially. An analysis by the Center for American Progress in 2017 said in the year before Act 10 was made law, the percentage of the teachers who quit was annually about 6.4%. After Act 10 was passed in the next year, 10.5% of teachers quit their job. And it has largely stayed over the pre-Act 10 numbers since then, with the most recent year that we have data for in 2015-16, where 8.8% of teachers left the profession. In the same years, coming after Act 10 in Wisconsin, Republicans did the largest cuts ever to K-12 education in modern history in the state of Wisconsin, and more than $1 billion have been cut from our public schools since 2011. I would now like to bring on my guest to discuss education in Wisconsin a little bit more, Representative Sondy Pope from the 80th Assembly District, which represents parts of Dane, Greene, and Iowa counties. Welcome, Sondy.
Thank you.
You've been a longtime education advocate. You've been our ranking member for our caucus on the Committee on Education, and you most recently served on the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding. With all of that, you've had a front row seat for a lot of the decisions, good, then mostly bad, in recent years. Where do you see things right now in terms of the ongoing, debate over how do we solve education funding? Is there a way to improve our public schools that will make everybody happy around the state?
Well, I don't know. I really don't. What I can tell you is that when I first was asked to run for the legislature, and it was basically around education issues, we were at that time talking about funding. And we're still talking about funding, and we haven't resolved that issue at all. My hope today is that with Tony Evers as our governor, we at least have a path and a light if we choose to follow it. I don't have a great deal of confidence in the ability of my Republican colleagues to do that, and I can tell you what we're doing today is not sustainable. Killing the union, the teachers' union in particular, was by design. It was a national trend, I think, and it's destroying public education. It really is. As you mentioned earlier, we have about 30% less students going into education as a career choice. Certainly the rural areas are suffering probably more than the cities, but this is not a sustainable way to educate our children, and again, it's by design.
What do you think? And that's, we've kind of, the further away we get from it and the more we see the challenges, we're obviously seeing that as one of the big explanations for, people retiring earlier than they would have, fewer people getting into the profession. I know that I never sort of identified people that taught as being a Democrat or Republican. They mostly were teachers first. Certainly many people that were active supported, perhaps people that supported public education more. But in terms of lingering impacts, why do is it financial? Is it just the what people experience growing up with their parents in Wisconsin? Why do you think fewer students are going into education overall?
Well, because they're not being advised by their parents, by their mentors to go into education, because one, it's really difficult to make a living that way and raise a family. Two, the morale of teachers is pretty much abysmal based on what they see as their future. And, the respect is gone. They were blamed for all kinds of things that they didn't do. And, it's almost an abusive work situation because people who are teachers go into that because it's like a calling for them. They love working with kids. They give more than, other professions do in terms of working on their own time and paying for things out of their own pocket. And we take advantage of that. We, the state of Wisconsin, take advantage of that, and it just is not sustainable.
What do you think the thing about Act 10 in general and teachers union in general that, maybe the public misunderstands, the most or may not understand?
I'm so immersed in it, it's hard for me to put myself outside of that realm and imagine it. I think lots of people look at what teachers had and thought, let's bring them down to our level, rather than, the rising tide lifts all ships. It was coming out of the
recession,
right.
And there was a lot of that.
Right. So I'm not sure how other people view it. You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to comment on, and that in 17 years serving here in the legislature, I have missed one vote on the floor during session, and that was Act 10. I didn't get to vote on that. I was standing at the back of the room, and I noticed the Republicans start showing up and taking their seats, and I thought, man, this is kind of weird. Wonder what's going on. And I'm observing this from the back of the room. The vote was called. I couldn't get to my seat and push my button in time in the few seconds that we were allowed to vote. The only vote I've ever missed.
The vote was red.
Ah, well, okay.
And it's hard in a relatively brief podcast to cover all of those things. And I know I sort of zoomed through what took place and how it took place, because I think that was part of the damaging aspect for those of us who have been in the legislature for a while in terms of the culture created, the toxic partisanship, the power above all that I think has been a part of things in Wisconsin since then.
And you know what? I look at the faces that were there at the time. I haven't forgiven them. Not that they care, but I just haven't. I feel so betrayed by them with that vote and what went on that day that I have not forgiven them.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of us that were hoping for the best and not expecting the worst, it represented a new low in our politics.
It sure did.
We've certainly seen in other parts of the country and with our national politics, but it divided the state as well. And we saw the early tribalism that we see kind of impacting the rest of politics in our state.
Walls were built that have not come down.
Yeah. Because what do you think the most important thing for that we could do to address the challenges impacting kids and public education in Wisconsin now? I know that I was intrigued by the governor's proposal to sort of give a weighted factor for kids in poverty, given the challenges and correlation between educational outcomes in poverty. Why didn't that get more traction? And do you think that? I mean, to me, that seems to be the great challenge that we have, is that students in poverty tend to have more challenges, and education is the great equalizer for opportunity.
Well, good for you. You get an A+, because that's absolutely true. That is the one factor that would have made the biggest difference, would be to weight poverty.
Don't you think that we didn't talk enough about that during the budget debate, given that, both certainly the special education investment was big, but I thought the fact that Governor Evers included that?
Nobody wants to take ownership of having poverty in their district. It's probably the reason why so many of our students, especially in rural communities, don't sign up for free and reduced lunch. There's a pride factor involved. Nobody wants to say my school, superintendents and administrators don't want to say my school district is poor. We have a lot of poverty here. It just doesn't sell well. So I think it's one of those things we kind of walk around rather than face.
Well, we'll have to see what comes next, but a lot of the issues we're talking about we'll probably be talking about for a while.
Well, and I have to add, the people who are actually voting on this might not completely understand what poverty looks like because they aren't in it.
And I think that's part of the struggle, and we know a lot of the people that are impacted the most don't always participate in our system, and it is big and complicated, and I think it's certainly underrepresented at the table and something that impacts all of us. Focusing on you. This is your career. Can you remember the exact moment you decided to run for state assembly?
Do you know I can? I absolutely can. I was in Washington, D.C. I was lobbying for, of all things.
You knew you were not running for Congress, right?
President, I believe it was. No, I was lobbying for education issues as the legislative director of Wisconsin State PTA. And my friends and I had taken a night tour of the monuments, and I was standing inside the Jefferson Monument, which is a favorite of mine, and reading some of the inscriptions on the wall. And at that time, I had two choices. I was either going to run for the assembly or I was going to run as president of the state PTA. And I thought, okay, where can I make the biggest difference? My friends wanted me to run for PTA president because, we're friends and we would all be together. And I decided to go this route. And that's where I made my decision. And yeah, I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Can you tell us about your district? What should people know about the district you represent?
I have the best district in Wisconsin, by the way.
Kidding me? I thought that was not. I thought mine was.
No, it's mine. I have 3 counties. I have 3 cities. I have 21 townships, 11 villages, and 17 school districts, and each one has its own set of governing issues, and it's about as diverse as a district can get. We have the iconic barn farm and cows. We have big business. I have Epic sitting right there employing many, many of my constituents. Many of my constituents are University of Wisconsin educated and employed. It's a very diverse district where you walk a pretty fine line trying to decide how to support certain legislation. I have some of the best breweries in Wisconsin. Have you ever heard of New Glarus Brewery?
I
Yeah,
have.
that's
I
there.
have.
Wisconsin Brewery is there. We have artisanal cheese makers. We have iconic little villages like Mount Horeb and New Glarus, whose culture is celebrated, about every other weekend. It's a great district.
Beyond your role in education and helping obviously shape things in the budget and advocating and serving as ranking member on the committee, what are your goals for the rest of the session? What kind of projects are you working on?
I am probably going to die fighting against vouchers. It's the thing that keeps me getting up in the morning and coming here, is to try and turn around the voucher machine, and adequate school funding. So I'm always going to be working on those things. But in addition, I've got a few things in the hopper that probably will never see the light of day. Compassion choices, where we are allowed to die with the assistance of a physician at a time of our choosing. Long stories about that nobody wants to hear, but that's one of the things I'm working on. Paid family medical leave, another thing that we have a lot of trouble getting the Republicans interested in paying any attention to. Things like that.
I'm going to go into some shorter things. What's the least favorite part of your job?
Campaigning. Hate it, hate it, hate it.
What is your go-to late night food when we're in session?
Potato chips.
Potato chips.
Any kind of potato chip.
All right, now we're going to go into the general speed round. This will be another late night food. What is your favorite Girl Scout cookie?
Peanut butter patty.
Do you prefer, in terms of your footwear, clogs or mules?
Clogs.
What is your favorite show? Or do you prefer Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul?
Oh, Breaking Bad. I love Jesse.
Netflix or Amazon?
Netflix.
VHS or Betamax?
VHS.
That's for us, not for you guys. Turkish Delight or baklava?
Oh, definitely Turkish Delight.
I don't
Can't
believe
live
you.
without it.
I don't believe you.
You never saw me eat one, huh?
No. What show are you currently watching?
I don't watch television very much.
What about streaming? You just dropped those.
I just
You only watch
finished.
shows about meth or
I
what?
just did Veep, and really, I don't watch television.
Okay.
I'm the intellectual type who reads.
Wait, is your district a big reader district? Is that what you're?
Oh yes, oh
You
yes.
sound like Danny Reamer on Cream Puffs. What's your coffee order these days?
Oh, extra hot mocha grande, extra shot.
Just say large. Don't buy it. I don't use their terms.
I can't drink a large. You get tired of it. Grande.
Starbucks or Ancora?
Starbucks. I own
Starbucks or Colectivo?
Starbucks.
Okay. Favorite New Glarus beer?
Probably Staghorn right now.
Biking or kayaking?
Kayaking. Although I just bought an electric bike, so I might get there.
Don't you think we should have regulation of those electric bikes?
Oh yes, they should be licensed and we should tax them.
Blue. Lacrosse or Eau Claire?
Lacrosse.
Best fall soup?
Butternut squash.
Vacation or staycation?
Vacation.
Buffalo or Phoenix?
Phoenix.
Old fashioned or spotted cow?
Spotted cow.
Badger Game or Farmer's Market?
Farmer's Market.
Monona or Mendota?
Mendota.
Concerts on the Square or the Union Terrace?
Concerts on the Square.
Funnel cake or cream puff?
Cream puff.
Paul Ryan or Newt Gingrich?
Really? That's a choice? Nope, you got nothing coming here. Can't
Could have
do
been
it.
worse. Senate or Assembly?
Oh, definitely Assembly.
Paul Newman or Robert Redford?
Robert Redford.
2010 or 2016?
16, I guess.
Would you prefer someone on the floor be too loud or speak for too long?
I'd rather they spoke for too long.
Act 10 or lame duck session?
Oh my God. Nope, you got nothing.
The least favorite committee you have ever served on?
Housing, and I didn't last. I made Peter Barca give me a different assignment. It was that bad.
Taco John's or Taco Bell?
I don't eat either.
there's a large segment of your district that's very upset.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I want my Norwegian meatball then.
Facebook or Twitter?
Facebook.
Which makes you shake your head more? Someone wearing a man bun or capri pants?
I'm going with the man bun.
Fair enough. Sondy, thank you for joining it. This is it for this week's Some Assembly Required. I want to thank Representative Evan Goyke for filling in the past 2 weeks. The reviews are in, and you did an adequate job. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher Radio. Subscribe and leave us a review. Thank you to our special guest, Representative Sondy Pope, and to our executive producer, Shinya Tao. Until next week, this is Assembly Democratic Leader Gordon Hintz.